Take it easy. Take it easy.
All right, everyone, welcome into the pod. My name is Nate, and as always, I'm joined by Tony Zuma, the Z to my E.
Glad to be here as always. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
And as this is a follow-up episode, our part 2 of our kind of exploration or discussion of Job, we are joined by the same two fine gentlemen that joined us for part 1. Michael Schlender and my brother, Kane.
Yeah, we're glad to have you guys again.
Well,
Thank
guys,
you for joining us.
It's a good discussion.
Yes, I always enjoy having the dynamic of just more voices in the room. It can be nice to just like boil it down to just 2, like a back and forth, but 3 and even 4. And one of these days, I think we're gonna try to do like a digital round table sort of
we
thing.
We like changing it up, that variety. It's gonna be nice when we get that many people too. A little bit of a logistics nightmare, I imagine, but we'll make it happen.
Yeah, we did try once already, and people who said they could show up just didn't, and so we gave up on that.
So we never talk to those people ever again. That's the healthy way to deal with relationships and friendships, right? That's the easy way.
And we're all about the easy way,
the easy approach, and that's all you're here for. You can leave. So,
yep, that is just so we're any new listeners. That's not what we mean by an easy approach. We're talking about a more relaxed approach to difficult questions, not just the easy way to cut people out of your life when things get hard. I would actually say that might be a harder approach long term, because you're not going to have any friends.
True.
But if you heard that and you're like, I'm turning this off now because that's how I live my life, you can do you. That's just not how I would do me. So all that said, we're following up our Job conversation, where full disclosure, we intended to have a complete Job conversation in one podcast. That was the goal. And there's at least 3 major moving parts to Job and the message of the book in the Bible. And we really only ended up talking about one of them, which is the perspective of Job's friends. Canaan, Michael, Tony, what were any of the things that you guys remember from that last conversation? We're already a couple weeks removed from that. But was there anything that stuck out to you guys from that conversation and our kind of exploration of the perspective of Job's friends and that whole thing?
I mean, honestly, for me, just, reflecting on the last conversation, Job, I'm coming in cold on Job. I haven't read Job in a long time, probably longer than I'd like to admit, but it was really interesting because I only remembered certain parts of the story, and I didn't really remember the fact that Job's friends kind of sucked. And it was just very eye-opening, you know what I mean? But it was some of the discussion we had around, why Job exists in the Bible was really piqued my interest. So I'm interested to hear some of the rest of the perspective. But yeah, coming out of some of those other books, like we talked about Proverbs and all that, and how maybe some of that advice in there, if you just apply it as a blanket to everything, can actually be a negative thing. So anyways, that was all very interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like coming
Great.
from the idea that his friends and all of us had very specific presuppositions, ideas that they subscribed to, that they didn't question those ideas. They just played it out to the logical conclusion. And what I mean by that is bad things were happening to Job's life. Well, obviously, if you're a good person and a good Christian and a good follower of God, then these bad things wouldn't have happened. So go ahead, we're your friends. You can fess up to us the terrible, wicked thing that you did to deserve this, because you definitely did something wrong, Job. Understanding that perspective and where that stems from, I think that's fascinating, because it can translate to what maybe some religious or even non-religious people think about and operate out of in the current day. And so that's where I find a lot of interest.
Yeah, Michael, anything stuck out to you?
Just like the really transactional nature of what his friends were kind of bringing to the table. Just this you are suffering. It must be because God is punishing you.
Yeah.
Therefore, you must have done something wicked. And so, that's just it, the end. Maybe if you repented, about it, this would all be cool. So just, knock it off and repent already, Job. Jeez. Whereas Job throughout the whole thing is really sticking to his guns, saying about, no, I'm righteous, man. I didn't do anything. You guys are the worst comforters in the world for this.
Miserable,
my
miserable comforters. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time reflecting over Job over the years, over the last decade or so. And one of the things that our conversation kind of more recent, brought more fresh to my mind, I guess, was just that when someone is going through it, the worst thing to do is try to boil it down to any kind of transaction or even be aggressive in explaining. That's definitely miserable comfort. I think maybe, Michael, it was you that was saying that sometimes our own insecurities are brought online by the hard questions people are voicing when they're going through suffering. And then we can take that, our own insecurities about questions that we don't feel like we have a clear answer to, and then rebound that back onto the person who's suffering, trying to explain things away. Yeah. And that's not always what people need. Sometimes, often, people just need you to be there, sit quietly with you for a little while. So that was something that really stuck out to me as well. Cool, guys. Thanks for your thoughts. And all that said, let's pick up where we left off, because we talked about Job's buddies. At least we talked about 3 of them. There's another, not quite Job's friend, but a friend of a friend, a guy named Elihu, who shows up later. But I think probably he's most clearly going to come into view in part 3 of this podcast. So we'll talk about him later, because he mostly just gets ignored in the final review of everything. I'm really interested to hear y'all's thoughts on Job himself, because he's the one who's going through all this, right? He's the one he's being dragged through the mud, literally, proverbially, both. He's the one who's doing a lot of processing. And we did mention this last time, and we mentioned it because we were intending to talk about the entire thing last time. But we did mention last time that Job's, the New Testament summary of Job's life, which is he remained totally faithful Job. It isn't that black and white in the book of Job. Now, definitely Job has his very high faithful moments, really bright spots. But there's also a lot of what seems like some very brutal honesty and some raw emotion, and this sense of searching. I want to have an answer, but there's anger, and there's hurt, and there's a lot of emotion. Even in Job being this massive poem, there's a lot of emotion in the poetry in Job's sections. So let's step into Job's shoes a little bit. In the New Testament, we often hear about the patience of Job, but when you actually read his speeches, patient isn't always the first word that fits. You have these moments where he doesn't hold back, and he curses the day he was born, and he questions God, and he accuses, even at times, God, why do you contend with me, Almighty? And kind of like that Bruce Almighty scene where it's smite me, Almighty smiter. Yeah. Yes. Right. What does anything surprise you about that? Or is that no, that's very much firmly within my understanding of Job? Or does that stick out? Does that not vibe with how you viewed Job in the past?
It definitely does not vibe with how I view Job. I always viewed him as the picturesque, you did a good job, you hung in there, you know what I mean? You were faithful to the end. And maybe that's, to your point, my understanding of Job came more from the New Testament, not because I read the books, but no, man, it seems to your point, very raw. And I want to say more human than I had portrayed Job in the past, or at least how I understood him in the past.
Yeah.
But I feel probably most of us would go through these emotions, you know what I mean? Very very human, questioning God and wondering what's going on and begging for understanding, you know what I mean? Why is this happening to me? And feeling betrayed almost by God.
Yeah, I totally vibe with you because that was my when I went through this season of studying Job in Bible school. I had this particular framework of Job. He's like the guy that went through, and Job is probably just a couple chapters long. For some reason, I had that in my head, and Job goes through terrible stuff, and he never questioned God, and it was all very clean. And God said, "Great job, you never questioned me." At the end, but Job is not 3 chapters long. It's like 40 and change chapters long, of a lot of back and forth, and yes, definitely some high moments of faith, but also some very low moments in which he doesn't ever say, "I'm done." Like, screw you, God, I'm done. But he definitely has some pretty accusatory statements of God's intentions as he's wrestling with those things. Michael, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to you guys, having sort of just heard of him being talked about secondhand, you almost expect him to be like some kind of stoic sufferer, where it's like all these awful things are happening. He's like, yes, these things do happen. But no, he like his suffering is, and his questions to God and his just the way he's going about it, I think is really honest. If I were to choose one word, it's raw and it's honest. And he definitely has questions. It's definitely not that he never questions God. Like it was very much like he has statements in there like, God has wronged me and has drawn his net around me, and things like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's definitely, he has some strong statements in there. I will defend my ways to his face. Type like that. It's almost like he thinks there was like a clerical error that happened. Like, no, I'm suffering in the wrong here because some angel messed it up, and I need my day in court, baby. We're gonna clear this out. So yeah, his wrestling is through all this is real and like honest feeling.
Yeah. Is that picture of like going through something terrible and then feeling all the things that you feel when you go through something like that, and then vocalizing them, whether to God or others? Is that something that you guys can relate with on a personal level?
I think for me personally, when thinking about seasons in life that have not been ideal, where things have not gone according to plan, the way that instinctively I have handled them has not been to vocalize them and to communicate them and to even stand up for what I think it's right. It's more of a endure and survive in operating out of this survival mindset of just need to push through this, and with time things will get better, less aggressive and direct, which is what it seems like Job has no qualms in being aggressive and direct with his lamenting.
Yeah. Do you, with how you've processed that, Tony, as being more of a silent sufferer? Because I lean in that direction as well. I feel like my family looks to me in a certain way, and the people that I work with look to me a certain way, and the people in my circle look to me a certain way, and so my gut instinct is to like, shut up, like, just quietly go through it until it's over. I mean, have there been pros and cons to that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've discussed this a little bit in previous podcasts, which if this is your first time listening to one of our podcasts, we're glad that you're here, but please don't be afraid and go back to some of our episodes that we've had already. We're still in the beginning. But yeah, isolation for sure. When you have this voice inside of you that says, "Hey, suck it up. Don't make a mess out of this. Don't make a bigger deal than what it is." Yeah, there is the aspect of you don't want to add to the fuel to the fire, right? You wanna make sure that you're dousing the flames to some degree, but more than anything else, you're isolating yourself. You're almost saying, "Hey, I am strong enough, or I should be strong enough on my own to carry this weight." And if I'm not, then there's something wrong with me. And so it's like you're carrying that weight at the same time that you're telling yourself these lies, quite frankly, that are bred out of levels of insecurity. And it can, if you're not careful, depending on the severity, can turn into a vicious cycle that's very hard to break. And it does have consequences down the line of where you feel isolated, you feel like you're alone, no matter how many people actually are around you in your life.
Yeah, I think maybe it was in the second episode we recorded, we were talking about going through suffering. And this is very much an adjacent conversation to this one, not so much through the lens of Job, but just through like just some personal anecdotes and stuff like that. And the role of community
Absolutely.
definitely
Yeah.
came up quite a bit. Yeah, quite a bit. So I'll put it this way to you guys, where Job has these moments where he curses the day he was born, and he expresses like pain, and then questions God very, very loudly. And yet this is in the Bible, right? Like this is given to us. And like spoiler alert, but God is going to kind of give an evaluation of all of the speakers in the book, like Job's friends and Job. And he's going to, as we talked about in the last episode, he rebukes Job's friends. He says, you guys have not spoken of me what is right, but my servant Job has. Even in the midst of all of the wrestling and the anger and whatever else. So with this being given to us in the Bible, my question to you guys is, do you think there's something that is valuable or even healthy about being willing, like Job is, to be very brutally honest as you go through pain, instead of like suppressing it and then acting like you're totally fine?
I mean, just thinking through it, and I like to process sometimes like relationship with the Lord, similar to like regular real relationships. And
Yeah.
I tend to be a bottler for sure. I think probably most all of us in this room would be bottlers, whereas my wife is not a bottler at all. If something's wrong, she speaks up about it within seconds. So something I've had to learn, at least in relationship with my wife, and I think also in relationship with the Lord, is like when something is wrong, bring it up. Like obviously there's a good timing sometimes in regular relationships, especially like marriages and relationships with your kids or friends or whatever. But like I have had to learn how to bring up stuff that's going wrong and suffering, you know what I mean? Or disappointment or whatever. And like that's been something that's been very healthy for me to start doing in my relationship with my wife. Where instead of flying off the handle and being like, that's it, I'm leaving. I'm getting in the car. I'll be back in 3 hours. You know what I mean?
I'm going back to work.
I've had to learn to stop and say, hey, can we talk about this? I'm actually really like, this is really something I'm struggling with or whatever. I think that's a very healthy thing to do. And I think Job is actually doing that in a somewhat healthy way where he's bringing concerns to the relationship and saying, this isn't cool with me, like what gives, I'm doing everything I can, what gives? And whereas probably most people, and I've seen this happen in real life, right? Bad things happen, they go through suffering, and they never take a chance to process anything with the Lord. They just say, that's it, I'm done, towels thrown in, we're not friends anymore. You know what I mean? And they walk away from faith entirely. But yeah, so to answer your question, I think it's a very healthy thing in a regular relationship and in a relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, I think like the honesty through hard things is tremendously important. Like Kanan was saying, there's kind of the place to learn when to do so. Like Nate, you had been talking about like you have maybe your family looking to you a certain way or your coworkers looking to you a certain way. I lead a Bible school. I have this sense of like, well, my staff look at me a certain way. How do I bring up that things aren't okay or that I'm going through something really, really hard? So like learning, I guess, kind of like when to shelve things for a bit, but not just keep them there is an important skill. That's a leadership skill, I think, ultimately. But then being able to go back to that honesty and bring others into it, because I think a lot of healing in the midst of suffering, and a lot of support that you could have is from your friends and family. And so suffering alone is always harder. And unfortunately, Job could have had more support, but he had bad friends. Um, but like in my experience, bringing in my family members, or having talked with my staff members about things I'm going through has always gone well for me, but it's because they're relatively mature individuals. But like honesty with yourself, I think as well. Like how can you heal while you're kind of like lying to yourself? Like you're trying to heal and process for a person that doesn't exist if you're just lying about how you're actually feeling about it. And so you'll just be stuck and continuing suffering where you could be trying to make a way forward in it. And so, yeah, I agree with Canaan that I think you see Job doing exactly that. He wants not to like dodge out on God. He wants his day sort of quote unquote in court to talk to him. It's like,
Yes.
I want you to tell me what's going on. I want to understand to a certain extent, and I want to be able to talk about what I just went through.
Yeah.
And and I think that's healthy.
Oh, I was just gonna say, something that you said, Michael, that's resonating with me is also something that connects back to something that Nate brought up, I think in the second episode, actually, like you mentioned earlier, Nate. And it's the idea that, man, if only Job had better friends, right? Because that community wasn't necessarily there for him. And there was two sides to that, and I guess you'll see me playing that devil's advocate a lot, looking at both sides of a coin. But it's like what I try to do more than anything else, especially if we're talking about something in the Bible, for people who are Christian and people especially who aren't Christian, why does this matter? How can I apply this to every day? And how do I put myself in this person's shoes, right? So if I put myself in Job's shoes for a moment and I'm looking at his quote unquote friends, I have to ask myself, were these necessarily bad friends in the sense that, like, well, if you see how they first responded, they didn't automatically reject Job, from what I can tell. They didn't automatically say, "Hey, Job, you're a piece of crap." Like they stayed around. They were trying, I think, from their perspective, as limited and skewed as it was, to give advice and to be helpful like a friend should. It's just that their advice was completely built on the wrong foundation, right? And so what I'm
Yeah.
getting at here, it connected back to what you were said earlier, Nate, is that yeah, community on one side of the coin is very, very important, not isolating yourself. But then there is that other side where you have to, at the same time, take the time to build yourself up internally. Where and I think you had a better way of describing that, Nate. But there has to be this voice inside of you, this identity that you build with your relationship with God, moving forward, that says, "Hey, I recognize that my friends are trying to be friends. Like they're not being my enemy right now, but I also know what is true. And what's true in this situation is I did not do something to deserve this. And so I think Job says a lot. We talk about the importance of community, but I think Job does say a lot about the importance of autonomy in building that internal strength. Does that make sense, Nate?
Yeah, I think as with so many things, it's a balance. I mean, you can be so community oriented in your life choices that you have no kind of internal depth or individual understanding of truth or cultivation of wisdom with God. And then the reverse is true. I mean, like we all talked about how probably all four of us lean into bottling things up and processing alone to maybe protect the others around us or whatever else, and how that can also be like the other end of the extreme. Michael, I loved your point there about the even the balance aspect of when to like there's times to not air out
Yeah,
what you're
wisdom.
going through.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's times where you shouldn't, and the people around you are going to be hurt by something that you can and should be processing alone with God. And there are other times when shutting things up and avoiding inviting your community into it is exactly what you should not be doing. So, how do you know when to do what to do? That's developing wisdom, and I think the beautiful thing about the God I have allegiance to is that he has said that he is with me until the end of the age, and that he's teaching me and empowering me to make these kind of choices. He's granting me wisdom over time as I follow him. So yeah, cool. These are great thoughts, you guys. I wanted to add another thing here, because as I was describing, even as I was asking the question about whether there's something valuable and even important about willingness to be brutally honest, especially with willingness to be brutally honest to God. Is there such a thing in the community aspect as toxic positivity, specifically in relation to people who are going through hard times or suffering or pain? Obviously, when I think of toxicity, I think of negativity. But is there such a thing as a culture, or the way we treat people who are suffering, being like, you don't need to go there, just be positive. Like we don't talk about the negative, we don't talk about the bad. Yeah, I've heard some things about different kinds of art studios or game studios or movie studios where they have a culture of positivity. You don't talk about the things that are going wrong because that would be negative. When in reality, you're creating this whitewashed culture in the thing you're trying to accomplish, in which refusal to acknowledge what needs to be fixed or what needs to be addressed is actually preventing you from creating something good. So my question is that a factor? Can that be a factor in even like faith communities, a church or friend group or whatever else, toxic positivity?
Yeah, and Kanan, I'm particularly interested in your perspective here, because I know historically for our listeners, Kanan has been a worship leader in a church for a good number of years, and his musical talent is kind of disgusting. I hate thinking about it every single time, and that probably goes for Nate too. But yeah, with from a you have dealt with the church in a professional day-to-day matter type of context. And so I'm interested if you've ever had those kind of encounters, or your perspective on the idea of negative positivity.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely find that in corporations. I've been a part of several. I've worked both at churches and in the corporate world for a while. I'm now blessed to be out of it, but I've seen that both at churches and in the corporate world, unfortunately. And I mean, I don't know what is worse, toxic negativity or toxic positivity. I think they're both terrible. And obviously in the Job situation, you got like the other side of the coin, right? You got these friends who just like, I don't want to say they're toxic negativity, but like they're not obviously speaking from a place of understanding, and they're just harping on the poor guy, and when he didn't need that. But I mean, you could definitely have super toxic positivity, right? And I could see if somebody's in a position where they're really suffering. Nate, you talked about a little bit about your experience where somebody had given you sort of you're in a place of suffering, and they gave you really the same thing that Job's friends are giving him, right? Which is like, hey, if you just repented, everything's gonna go well for you, But
Yep.
on the other side of the coin, if somebody came to you and just said, dude, you know what? God is faithful all the time. Just why can't you just be happy? You know what I mean? Like, can't you just get over it and just put a smile on your face and move on? I mean, that's not what people need in these moments, right? He probably just needs somebody to just sit with him and maybe, say, hey, you need a place to stay since all your crap's burned down and your kids are dead. You know what I mean? Like, kind of feed you some meals. I don't know, something. But yeah, no, I mean, there's definitely, without a doubt, toxic potential for toxic behavior on both sides of that, whether it's positive or negative.
I see this a lot in, at church and just Christian culture in the West in general. I haven't seen it so much when I've gone out east, like with some of the guys I work with out in like India, Bangladesh, Nepal, the idea of suffering is a lot more, well, it's just a lot more present. A lot of them are, like, if you talk to the Bangladeshi guys about suffering, they're like, yeah, we tried to hand out band-aids in a Muslim village and we got strapped to a tree and beaten.
Jeez.
It was a rough Wednesday. You're like, yeah. So it's like suffering's a little bit more, I don't know, just like present to them, and you don't hear much in the way of like, I wasn't catching a lot of like like that toxic positivity. I think the over here in the States and the West in general, I think we're so uncomfortable with the idea of suffering. I don't know necessarily what exactly the background theology that's working in our like worldview like might be producing that. But I mean, a lot of people's general theology is even like, like the rapture. Before things get bad, we don't even have to suffer. We get, sucked right off of the planet before that even happens. And, just so you know, I don't, roll with that particular theology, but I think it's kind of instructive that it's as common as it is mostly over here. So like, I don't know, at church, my son was born with a cleft lip and palate. That was really hard. He's got just a lot of medical things that we have to bring him to and things like that. And people are, I'd say like the most common thing was like, God's got a plan. But
Yeah.
people kind of say that it's like God has a plan, but in like the subtext is very much like, so stop crying about it, please.
Yeah.
Same with like, brother, we just gotta, rejoice always.
Oh man, I hate that so much.
Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. And again, it's like, please turn the dial, like the volume on your grieving down. You're too loud. Or like, kind of along with God's got a plan. Everything happens for a reason, which is very much, I think, like that's the biggest disconnect from the wrestling process that you can do.
Yeah.
Right? Like he's got a plan. This is for a purpose. He's got a reason. So, kind of just knock it off with this sad face. I don't want to see it anymore,
Yeah.
And it's really a refusal, I think, to make space for real pain and real struggle and ultimately some real mystery, because I don't think we always get the answers. And actually, I think Job doesn't actually get that many answers at the end. God gives him something, and Job is apparently satisfied with an element of it, but he never finds out any of the background story to why any of this was going on for him. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of like I see that line of thinking, and it's like in churches around here, that toxic positivity, and it's brutal. It hurts every time.
Yeah.
And they're trying to comfort you. I think they're trying to comfort themselves more than you. But it stinks every time.
Yeah, you're pushing.
Yeah, there was.
Oh, go ahead, Kanan.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we, my wife and I, when we first got married, my wife had a miscarriage, and we showed up at church, and it kind of like spread around, and we went to a very small church at the time in Oregon. Well, a lady came up to us and said, it's really probably for the best. You guys are so young, you have so much life to live. And she was very happy and positive about it. And I was just like, that is like the last thing. That is the last thing I want to hear right now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But no, I think I agree. It's just like, man, I think people just don't. And many times it's well-intentioned people who do not get it. They're speaking from a place of either, to your point, Michael, not having been through a lot of suffering. It's the people who have suffered the most who can speak life into people who are going through grief and suffering, because they're acquainted with it. They know what it's like, and anyways, sorry, Tony, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
Go
that's
ahead.
great. You saying the words well-intentioned hits exactly on what I was saying next. I mean, none of these people are actively trying to be bad or be evil or be wrong. No one's wrong in their eyes, right? But the reality is, someone's gonna have to be wrong, and whether it's us or not. And so I just think that the understanding of that people want to be there for you, but they just are coming from the wrong direction. It really, like Michael, what you were saying really touches on a bruise, right? For me personally, when it does come to Christianity. And this is another one of those I'm trying to put myself in someone else's shoes who maybe they were Christian and they were raised that way and they just never went further themselves, or they were Christian to the point that they were all in and experienced a number of different things that caused them to be very disillusioned and very disenchanted with what they've seen. I think religion, and not this isn't just unique to Christianity, but I think religion is such a susceptible breeding ground to toxic positivity that it's one of the number one influences as to why someone does not want to be religious, why someone
Mm.
can't
Mm.
believe in God. I'm not saying it's the only thing, of course, but because they see so many layers of hypocrisy, or they see so many dead ends of a Christian handling a situation, Canon, like you and your wife went through with the miscarriage, or Michael with your child. And maybe it's not to the historical context Job was in, where, oh well, you obviously did something wrong in order to have this happen to your life. But today's context of, hey, everything happens for a reason and God has a plan, and platitude, platitude, platitude doesn't do anything in reality to actually encourage and edify and be there for someone else. And I don't care if you're religious at all. I don't care
Yeah.
if you're Christian at all. When someone's going through the shit, we need to be there for them. And
Mm.
yeah, it's hard to figure out what that is exactly, but the first step is having that heart of, I want to be there. I don't want to serve these platitudes. I don't want to. Um, Here's a great opportunity for me to evangelize the religious thing that's on my forehead right now. Whenever you're intentionally doing that or not, that's what comes off so many times when people are in different stages of grief. So yeah, that is
Eh,
big, big thing for me.
Yeah, and I think you look at just looking at this whole situation with Job's friends, they all had a lot to say.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if you look at the chapters, I was looking at a brief summary, like they all had multiple speeches that they rattled off for Job. Like they had thought about this stuff, you know what I mean? All of them. And but none of them showed up and actually did anything. All they did was show up and give a speech, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I think probably all of you guys at one point or other are familiar with that, right? Somebody who wants to give a speech as opposed to serve
Yeah.
or suffer with alongside, and like the people that I remember having the most helpful during those times were the people who knocked on my door and showed up at my house at 11 p.m.
Mm.
and offered a kind word, you know what I mean, or a meal, or like
Mhm.
they went out of their way to suffer with us, you know what I mean. And we had a
Mhm.
family at our church who they have like 4 kids, and the husband passed away after a battle with cancer, but he's like in his 40s,
Gosh.
and it's funny because I feel like there's always somebody who wants to give a speech,
Uh-huh.
and the last thing you want to do when you're a 10-year-old and your dad just passed away, or you're the wife of the husband and your husband just passed away, the last thing you want to do is hear a speech, whether it's eloquent and accurate or not, you know what I mean.
Mhm. Yeah.
You just want people to just show up for you, like, and sit with you or put an arm around you, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
or bring you a meal or whatever that is, but yeah, something that stuck out to me with the whole Job Sprint situation is like we all had these like almost to the, and again it's a poem, but like they had this, they all had things they wanted to say and communicate, and none of them are helpful,
Yeah.
But anyways,
Yeah, and so with that being said, Nate, back to you. Unless I'm skipping anything here, I'm very interested in the next step of this Job conversation of God's perspective and what his input was on this.
Yeah. Well, we can go there.
Am I skipping a
But,
step if we do that?
We might be biting
Yeah,
on more than
that's
we can
true
chew.
too.
Because we're coming up, we're like 15, 20 minutes away from the end of the hour. That's a whole third
Mhm.
part here. So I'll say let's
Yeah.
pause on that part, and because I think there's a couple more things I'd like to explore about Job's response here, and kind of landing the plane, I guess, in some ways. I think y'all's thoughts are really good, really great. I'm glad we brought up the toxic positivity thing, because I do think it's just very unhelpful and very counter to what a faith community or just community should
Yes.
be. So great. You guys really covered a lot of ground there. With Job and his even just like internal processing, I think one of the things that kind of sticks out to me with the way he processes through this stuff, and with the fact that the Bible then presents us, and even from God's estimation, Job didn't do anything wrong. Job represented me correctly. I think it's giving us like a real sense in which we are being given permission to have times in which we are thoroughly not all right in a world, and even in like faith circles where there is a pressure to always have a positive spin. And indeed, it can be good to have a positive spin and to be optimistic and to have hope. Like that's very valid. But the other side of that is the toxic, like so much of that, and refusal to acknowledge reality that you can end up being thoroughly unhelpful. So I think it's why seeing that and really getting into it, for some people, it's deeply uncomfortable to see Job's like lamenting in such a raw way, because we like that. Part of us likes that toxic positivity, because Michael, you put it very well. I think many of us in the West are very uncomfortable with pain, and with being raw and real. But for me, it hits like a breath of fresh air. It's a painful air.
It's like
but
you're
it's fresh air.
breathing.
Yeah.
It's like really
Yeah, it's
minty.
like- yeah, that's right. Kind of burns going down. Just like drinking cognac.
Like fireballs. There you
Oh,
go.
jeez. Right. Yeah. 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 I think there's also an element here where the kind of relationship that God wants with us is not a shut up and
Yes.
sit down, or shut up
Yeah.
and take it, or even just like a transactional sort of thing. In a real relationship, you're searching for connection, and you're pushing for connection. And sometimes that involves anger and frustration and confusion. But I think all those things that we see from Job are very, very different than just giving up. And I think that's very, very important with the arc of his character. He constantly in the book, repeatedly in the book, talks about like his memory of the intimacy that he had with God. He says like, when God's friendship was upon my tent. But then there's this whiplash of like, but now he's turned cruel to me. Now it seems like he's abandoned me. He's not around. I think it's chapter 29. He says, I wish that I were in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head. By his light I walked through the darkness, as I was in my prime, when the friendship of God was on my tent. But there's this confusion, where not only does it feel like God's abandoned him, but it also feels like God is coming after him. So he talks about, like, when I lie down to sleep and I want to rest, I'm going to be scared with dreams from you. Like, God's going to zap me with dreams and visions. Like, I can't even rest. It feels like God is actively coming after me. But he's expressing that. And it's not even the case that everything that comes out of Job's mouth is literally true. But it is the case that you're seeing him process through these things. And it can feel like whiplash, because you have the anger, you have the sense of like injustice, you have the sense of like, why do I even try to argue with you? Because you could just do whatever you want. You have this line in chapter 10, which is like, it's whiplash. He goes, you have granted me life and steadfast love, and your care has preserved my spirit. How wonderful. That's verse 12, chapter 10, verse 12. Let's just end it there. And then 13 goes, yet I know you were hiding this intention in your heart. I know that this was your purpose for me all along. And you can see the back and forth, where in one moment, I think this is very true to suffering. In one moment, we're like, I know God is good, and I know things are going to turn out okay, and I know there's hope. And then like minutes later, we can be like, and you contrived to do this, didn't you? You wanted to take it off from me, didn't you? It's just like the emotional roller coaster that we can have in relationships and whatever else. But he's not reacting in the way that the accuser hoped he would react, is he? The whole thing setting up at the beginning of the story is he'll curse you, and he'll like curse God, abandon God entirely, and die. That's what I think is going to happen. And Job is instead like he's seeking, he's angry, and I really think this is permission to like be thoroughly unokay, and to be angry, and to cry at the heavens. And Lord knows I've done my fair share of that. After Savannah's, brain cancer diagnosis, I've had those moments where I have yelled at the heavens, like that scene in The Fiddler on the Roof, where the main character is arguing with God up on the roof, right? I think in my upbringing, my church upbringing, that was a big no-no. I think you don't express that kind of stuff. That's irreverent, and we don't speak to God that way. And then Job is just the foil to that, because not only does Job speak to God this way and say even like harsher things, often like actually, not only does he speak of God this way, God affirms it at the very end. So I think that's a really, really big deal to me. That's been a big deal to me over the last decade of my life. And I think as we go through suffering, it's not just something that God tolerates. It seems to be by virtue of the fact that like this book is included in God's revelation to us. It seems to be not just permission, but like an invitation. Yes. Come and process, come and be raw. God is not intimidated by this, but invites us into this kind of dialogue, this kind of searching for answers. And so like bringing this a little to the end, I wanted to say one other thing, just as a clarification. Yes, I kind of have downplayed the New Testament's summary of him as being purely faithful with no struggle, because that isn't true. We just looked at quite a lot of examples of how that isn't true. But on the other hand, he has these moments of like faith in the fire, right? He's got these moments of strong, incredible, like steadfast faith, which is like those are the things that we do pull out and stick in songs today. So like Job 13, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Or I know my Redeemer lives in Job 19. I mentioned this already, but it used to deeply, deeply bother me that he could say something like that over here and then say something like this other stuff over here. Like, I've been abandoned. Like, who is man that you're mindful of him, that you torture him day by day? That's something that comes out. He like quotes the Psalms in like this twisted, cynical way that both of those things can come out of somebody's mouth. But just to clarify, yes, Job has some incredible moments of conviction of God's character. It's just sometimes when your beliefs run up against your experience and they don't seem to work, they don't seem to mesh, the wrestling is an important part of it. It's an important thing. So I'll take all this and channel it into the landing the plane, which is, if we take Job's experience almost as like a case study, what are one or two things that Job and his process could teach us about how to navigate our own seasons of suffering, or even our seasons of confusion?
Yeah, I think to answer your question and something that you said that really stuck out to me about the accuser and what his perspective was, and how Job did not meet the expectations that the accuser was trying to predict. Despite all the struggle, and like you said, I completely agree. I think that Job is not only a case study of, hey, here is a perspective that is different than maybe we are used to, or even that the early church was used to when it was brought up as an example or an analogy for them in their historical context. But basically, it's an understanding that God is inviting us into that dialogue. It is a open invitation that says, engage with me, interact with me, be an adult with me. Don't just do what I say because I tell you to. Like, level up and be a part of the conversation with me. And so I love that. I love the idea that the accuser, his whole premise was, look, once you take away the good things from this guy, once bad things start happening in anyone's life, of course they're not going to be a follower of God. Of course they don't want to have anything to do with Christianity when they see the reality of this cruel world, and they're not being pampered by all of these easy life things, right? But at the end of it all, and while he's going through it, he doesn't just resort to what a child does, which is, I don't want these terrible things to happen to me, or hey, I'm very hopeful for these good things. He instead handles it with a level of maturity that engages in that invitation that God has given, that says, hey, let's wrestle. Hey, I'm not going to back down because I need the truth. I need to know what reality is, and not just, hey, you're bigger and better and badder than I am, so I'm not gonna stand up to you type of mentality, but instead a willingness that, hey, I welcome that. I welcome it because I'm not a bad God. I'm not a bad person, and you need to see that. That's the perspective that I have there.
I mean, I think he really shows again that it's okay to be like honest and even raw with like your emotions and where you're at. I think there's this sense of like, I don't know, like you can have like he did, like he's trying to wrestle through and figure out like, did I do something? I don't think I did anything. So what does that mean? Is God doing this to me? So yeah, he's having doubts, but having doubt is that's different than being like faithless. In the same way that just like grieving and lamenting it's not rebellious to do so. And I think in the West, there's that sense like if you're expressing grief, like you're complaining at God, knock that off. If you have your doubts, your foot's already, halfway in hell, and it's shortcutting people's faithfulness and the wrestling and the pushing forward into God and a process to perhaps understand more, but at the very least just gain like a closer relationship and some comfort. And I think I'd leave it in those two.
Yeah.
Two lessons.
That's good.
But yeah.
I think
Yeah.
for me, you gotta block out them haters.
Blocking out the
block them
haters.
out. No, but I think you should in times of grieving and seasons of suffering, you should seek out mature Christian counsel. Because I've heard of a lot of people getting hurt by a lot of Christians, and honestly, it's just immaturity and misunderstandings, or like we talked about, well-intentioned people with very poor foundation for understanding
Yes.
biblical suffering,
Yes.
and what that looks like. And so, yeah, this is one of my takeaways.
Good stuff, you guys. I guess throwing out one final little thing for anyone listening right now who might be in a tough spot or feeling like Job has felt, confused or angry or unheard or alone. I'm going to just throw out the idea as we wrap
Repent.
this up. That
They need to
sometimes,
repent.
yeah, that's right.
If you
right.
haven't learned anything,
Identify what you did that was wrong.
learn this. Sorry.
Yeah. I think maybe sometimes one of the most powerful things is knowing that you're not alone in feeling that way or having
That's
felt
right.
that way. And Job's story is very, and I think very, very intentionally even validating those hard
Yes.
emotions. That the kind of God that has created us and wants relationship with us is not a God that shies away from that sort of thing, but is a God that champions it and encourages it and even invites us into it, as long as it like falls in that line of neither toxically positive or toxically negative, but forward moving processing. The book of Psalms is another place where you see a lot of that sort of thing. But then even later in the New Testament with like Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where he says, we're hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed. We are perplexed, but we're not in despair. We're persecuted, but we're not abandoned. We are struck down, but we aren't destroyed. So there's an acknowledging of the hardship, and even the perplexed, right? There's like a thought thing that goes into this. We're not sure of the answer, but there's an underlying resilience there that pushes forward to the goal, right? So for those of you listening, I hope that you guys, as I have, and probably some of these other guys have, can take some hope and solace in Job's story. And later in part 3, we've got to look at, crucially, God's response to all this. Because God is going to chime in and say, he's going to provide an answer of sorts to all of Job's questions. So that's where we're going. We definitely are going to need a part 3 for that. That's why I kind of shut down the idea of hopping into it early, because it is, it's a whole other beast, but equally crucial in the point of the book of Job, I think. So, yeah. Awesome. Guys, thank you. Kanan, Michael, thanks for joining us. Tony, as always, this was a great time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, our listeners.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for joining us. And remember to just take it easy sometimes.
Easy.